The man never would have imagined that, right before the time travel, he'd even get to choose the difficulty level of his challenge. As an experienced gamer, he picked the Hell mode without hesitation. Just the amount of experience needed to level up was 100 times that of a regular player. Considering that class also affected the difficulty, he deliberately selected the 8-star class, the Summoner, whose potential was at its peak. After making this choice, everything went black, and when he opened his eyes again, he found himself at a completely different world. He retained full consciousness, but his bathing went the then kissing went blameless at Ablin Cracks. But a town different 20-year-old, he realized figuring into the situation. He was born into a fearless state Babylon, where generations had worked the land without any personal freedom, never allowed to leave the village for their entire lives. It was a classic Hell level start, but fortunately, his parents were both kind and decent people. Around the age of 20, his parents were still deeply in love. The usual golden hair that every time traveler should have ought to have appeared by now, but the Hell level difficulty seemed especially harsh. Even the summoner's abilities left utterly clueless. Then, one night, he suddenly realized he could operate his ability panel. The panel displayed the special steps him expressions, utterly similar stools. Mentally, with the cured out most his wafty. In the expressions he could summon. The fantasy was about to hiss out. He nearly got caught by his mother from sheer excitement. At 1-year-old, his body was simply too clumsy to move freely, so he had to put off his experiment for now. It wasn't until the next day at noon, when his mother went out on business, that he finally took advantage of the midday break to secretly activate his summoning ability. Had he known earlier that at this stage he could only summon H-grade summons 2 levels lower than F-grade, he'd have been disappointed. Yet when he saw the result with his own eyes, he was still summoned. The creature he'd summoned was definitely a grasshopper, the common one he find everywhere than a field. Only slightly larger, he was seriously quitted by intelligence. The criminally saying Eric remains at all, and the stash was really rarer than his own one you would sack for. But soon he noticed something crucial: each summoned creature could provide its master with buffs. A single grasshopper granted him 1 point of stamina and 1 point of agility, directly displayed as suffixes added to his stats. What made him even more speechless was that his very first summon had been trampled to death by someone his fortunately. As long as he had magic power, he could always resummon and resurrect it. Atheli, a protagonist, tried summoning a second Patamouse. Its stats and intelligence were similar to the grasshoppers, but Daedalus traded 1 extra point amount. Date Portal and 1 extra portion of physical strength. Initially, he could summon the Simlice and 2 grasshoppers at once, yet a combined stack of boots was pointed physic. His raw strength alone was already close to that of an adult. This was probably why the summoner's potential was so high. Of course, don't let these seemingly weak summons fool you. This world was actually full of powerful magical beasts, only he was just too low level to summon them then. Coincidentally, on the same day, his father and other villagers had hunted them the C-grade magical beast, a giant talented wild boar. The protagonist was curious about what the magical beast was like and begged his father to take him along to see. His father wouldn't agree. The boar was Kutimit's would take magic, except it was unusually suited. According to villagers fed killing saw the C-grade beast required to take magic that were 20 billion. Now the protagonist had a real sense of how dangerous this world really was. In the blink of an eye, 10 months had passed, and the protagonist's character level hadn't moved an inch, but after using his summoning skills day and night, his summoning skill finally reached level 2. Not only could he summon higher grade, giant level summons, but the maximum number of H-grade summons he could summon had doubled as well. The buff effects had also doubled, and the panel even gained a new feature, the ability to synthesize summons. Just as he was about to try synthesizing, Ian, the Fessum warned him that he didn't have enough magic power, so he settled for something the synthesis and tried summoning a new giant level summon that he hit the magic power ceiling. Right now, his magic power cap was only 2 points, and his character level couldn't be raised anytime soon, leaving him frustrated and stuck. Finally, at the age of 3, as his magic power marginally met the requirement, he unlocked 2 giant level summons, a frog and a mole. When he synthesized these 2, he could summon another bird. Each of them provided different stat buffs. More importantly, each summon had its own unique special skill. The grasshopper could leap, the mouse could run, the frog could hunt, and the mole could lead tills. And the true way to make the mouse release summoner was to utilize these special skills effectively. The only downside with the demon of the Ton Tunnel, the summons the taunts and Floodle, making it difficult for them to truly engage in battle. Fortunately, there was a local girl named Hunyo who came to practice swordsmanship with him every day. Despite the fact that, thanks to the summons bouts, his stats were already on par with those of an adult, she always managed to beat him soundly clearly. She was a natural-born swordwoman. Her swordsmanship talent was extraordinary, and her parents noticed, reassuring him not to lose heart. It turned out that in this world, children have the sacrification ceremony at the age of 42. It turned him whether they had any in the talents, and this was the illusion specific to rise to fall decision. With the protagonist, it was still fine with now, this further into the sudden with overworthy at the gate and pace of bond. He kept diligently improving his summons and skill levels every day. Even the original grasshopper now obeyed his commands obediently. On this day, good news arrived home. His mother was pregnant with their second child, and his little brother was about to be born. Coincidentally, the grasshopper he'd summoned had crawled up to his mother's feet, startling her badly. This sudden turn of events actually triggered labor. With rudimentary mentally, this is, they could only deliver the badly using the most traditional methods. Tilu's mother kept it to some experience and stopped him to assist with the delivery, setting all the men through the house. Hungry to smell, could only brothers winning safely, and his father married her method. After us, the male protagonist had only set his sights on clearing the Hell difficulty level, but from that moment on, he gained a new mission to protect his little brother. Before long, the day finally arrived for the 5-year-old's talent identification ceremony. The protagonist had expected his 8-star summoner's talents to be revealed to everyone at last, but the results left everyone utterly stunned. He had no talent whatsoever. Even the talent field displayed nothing but gibberish. Baiko. He trusted his talented friend, Mothine, who grown up one summer. He'd within the freestyle so it's his talent. Along with Skipper life as a cell of him treated to operation along to society he predicament who'd grain chart in the Ether's entire life, forever destined to be a farmer. Yet when his parents learned the results, they weren't disappointed in the slightest. They remained just as proud of him as ever. Though their family was poor, it was always warm and full of love, though no one knew that his true talent far surpassed even that of a sword saint. The dismal result was simply because he'd chosen the head of difficulty right from the start, meaning his growth rate was simply 1% of the normal pace, the description that wasn't entirely wrong, considering how low difficulty became. As for the suddenly tight shimmering up was gibberish, he'd just assumed it was a sitting bull. After that, he completely broke into the Syrian, began anything more little inconsequential in the half village. But Grona was completely different. The news of her sword Saint Awakening sent shockwaves through the city's nightly order. Even the commander himself came personally to meet her. The protagonist thought he'd be whisked away immediately, and the two would never see each other again. But unexpectedly, to verify the authenticity of her talent, the commander demanded she undergo a real combat test against none other than the deputy commander of the game. All likely order, in a life-or-death battle fought with real swords. Krenna had never even touched a real sword in her life. All Trina had been in the wooden practice swords. How could she possibly win? With using would mean committing treason, and there'd been no way out with death. The fight had to begin. Unlike Eddie Winnibus, who was choosing winning, Krenna herself looked excited. Hearing that she'd get to fight with real swords filled her with anticipation. She had no idea that failure meant certain death. The protagonist knew full well that her swordsmanship far exceeded that of an ordinary adult, but no matter how strong she was, she couldn't possibly defeat a deputy commander who'd seen countless battles. Sure enough, shortly after the fight began, due to her lack of depth experience, a deputy commander suddenly lost a powerful kick. Caught completely off guard, Krenna was kicked 5 yards to room. The protagonist caught Mufutsu. The wonder was sudden the fight, but due to spar lost to Disu. Death and Krav, Krenna's spar suddenly shook with commander suddenly saw to redeem the seasoned charity commander was taken away. When she swung her sword again, her attack was completely transformed, her spiritual energy making it nearly impossible for the deputy commander to defend himself. And with one single strike, she split the deputy commander's sword clean in two. The shocking twist sent the entire audience into utter chaos. The fight was over. The 5-year-old Krenna had defeated the Nightly Order's deputy commander, proving the title her sword saint truly deserved. The commander, who previously harbored us, immediately apologized for his earlier attitude. The crew felt that 3 years ago, sowing reports to Talis servitude, Thenius would saint entered Ryoko, only to pre-utterly useless. Since then, the mention had become safely sworn to go Talis to catching. In the commander's eyes, Krenna was undoubtedly worthy. By the time she turned 12, she'd be able to enter the academy for advanced studies, and soon, instructors would even come to the village to let her start learning ahead of time. With one person's success, the whole family rose along with them. Krenna's family had already skipped symptom, and it was wholly a matter of time before they joined the noble class. Yet her relationship with the protagonist didn't change at all. Their families had been close friends for generations, and their parents had been changing for less. They'd never grown distant because of their social strangeness. Still, the protagonist didn't intend that all stages to be change and distance were to grow. Only trust friend could provide Bill cards. Their move ahead, he'd still have to walk alone, picking his way forward step by step through the hellish difficulty. The reason summoners were hailed as the strongest 8-star class wasn't just because their summoned beasts could grant their masters attribute boosts. More. Crucially, every time they leveled up, their own abilities would skyrocket. But the protagonist's situation was downright bizarre. When he'd traveled through time, he'd chosen the hell difficulty, meaning he needed 100 times the usual amount of Berserkers to level up. Even more desperate was the fact that, as a sir, he wasn't allowed to lead ability all his entire life was Spitfire, with only fewer opportunities to Galati as staff. Even after reaching level up, his chances were few and far between, and the experience he could gain was negligible. Fortunately, while character levels were hard to raise, skill levels could be boosted simply by constant use. But after raising his summoning skill to level 3 at age 6, he hit a ceiling. To reach level 4, at his current rate, it would take at least 10 years of pace slower even than his mother's childbirth. Now, his family's 3rd child was about to be born, and the only silver lining was that, after leveling up to 3, he unlocked an enhancement skill that permanently boosted 2 of the words of the summoned beasts by 10 points each. Different summoned beasts that different attributes to beast, so he immediately would enhance all of them. At the same point, he was finally able to summon F-weight summoned beasts, leeches, potion pigeons, and one particularly special creature, an apple. Right now, the apple is the only summoned beast capable of granting him a magical boost, and the higher his magic, the more skill uses he can afford each day. His experience efficiency also increases accordingly. Just this one apple alone has slashed years off the time it would have taken him to reach level 4. Yet what piqued his curiosity was how exactly does an apple fight? Each summoned beast has its own unique special ability. He tried making the apple activated spell, and all that emerged from the ground was a tiny spell figure and puzzle spotted, yet utterly useless. After basic observation, Pillar, the protagonist finally discovered its true effect. The apple accelerated sleep-induced magic recovery, reducing the time needed to fully replenish his magic from 6 hours to 5. The only downside was that once the special ability was activated, the apple would take root completely, growing like a little tree and never being able to be retracted again. The days that followed were monotonous yet predictable. In the morning, he practiced swordsmanship with his childhood friend. Karina and Merle had been training since she was born. Even though the summoned beasts already beat his stats far beyond those of Woodnot Keeper, he still couldn't beat them, for nurture telling for swordsmanship with summoned Kuvornian. In the afternoon, he cracked his Fallen Stance of Eversy, hurling them a total of 200,000 times until his throwing skill reached level 3. As for his summoner skills, he didn't use them frequently. His magic was limited, so he only activated them every 5 hours. Just steady experience gains were enough for him. At first, he thought such a mundane life was perfectly acceptable. At worst, his level would rise a bit slower. But then, out of nowhere, bad news struck his father. While out hunting, had been seriously injured. Though the wound was active, it required long-term rest and recuperation. For years, his father had been defending his brave blood, but know that if while out, the household certainly lost its social food. His pregnant mother and young brother both being killed. The protagonist realized he could no longer stay in the shadows. He had to step up and support the family. The next day, he took on all the farm work himself. With the help of his summoned beasts, his strength had already far surpassed that of an average adult. although his efforts were somewhat conspicuous. To Althos, he just seemed like a peasant kid who'd suddenly become sensible despite lacking any real talent. Plus, with Karina, the future sword scene, drawing all the attention in the village, he wouldn't attract undue scrutiny at all. Soon after, his father woke up, but his body remained too weak to work. The burden of providing for the family now rested entirely on the protagonist's shoulders. With winter approaching, he knew he had to stockpile food as quickly as possible. In previous years, his father could print nearly 100 kilograms of wild boar meat, but now that his printer hunting, the protagonist had new chores were too. Whisk Catherine Wildbirds to Steve Elfunga, doing printing in Brisarel, and now to see them full of wonder. His summon frog had a ton ability, so the protagonist planned to use it as bait. Combined with simple traps, he managed to catch dozens of wild birds, but plans always fall apart when reality intervenes. Instead of birds, he ended up facing a tier 1 monster, the Grey Herring. The frog he'd summoned was only at the giant level, and against a tier 1 monster, it was utterly helpless. At first, the protagonist's instinct was a retreat, but the very next second, it froze in place. Was this really Crisis? No, it was his only chance to level up. If he was playing with the play, he'd never managed to raise his Kakin's level in even played life. But here he was, facing tier 1 monster right before his eyes, and thanks to his summoned beast's full support, his overall strength was already no weaker than that of a tier 1 monster. His throwing skill was at level 3, with range and power sufficient to deal serious damage. First, he threw a stone from afar, hitting the Huron hard. Then, he gripped his wooden sword and charged forward, simultaneously summoning several butcher dogs to launch biting attacks, a combination that was practically flawless. Still, he underestimated the monster's strength. The Heron flew into a furious rage, then retaliated instantly, killing the butcher dogs in one blow. The protagonist waited the rest of the time, but the Huron flew racks into them laying bud. It was at that moment that he finally understood a deadly truth. Once a summoned beast was killed, the corresponding buds would vanish immediately, and its stats would plummet dramatically. This was his first real battle against a monster, and he found himself in a life-or-death situation. At the last moment, he decided to do the opposite of what he'd planned. He'd pull out from his summoning space the leech, the seemingly most useless of all summoned beasts. Its attack power wasn't high, but at least it could serve as a distraction. He fully intended to use the leech briefly to buy himself some time and escape. But during Rachel Hummer, he realized summoning Chalkin beast leeches would actually suck in blood he was due to the Pumsubai estate. That realization made him instantly abandon any thoughts of running away. Although the leech would be killed in one hit, it could severely weaken the monster's status. So he kept repeating this tactic, summoning aggressive pet beasts to join in the attack. After countless rounds of fighting, the young man finally dealt the final blow, slaying the Huron once and for all. Normally, defeating a tier D monster would harness 100 experience points, enough to let an ordinary person jump several levels. But he had chosen Hum mode, where the experience of points to leveling up was 100 plus pointer. Those 100 points only managed to fulfill one tenth of his experience bar, leaving his level self at 1. Why? E.T., even just having a glimmer of hope for leveling up, made him feel utterly satisfied. The Heron's meat could be saved for winter, so he carried its corpse back home. This move shocked the entire village. After all, taking down a tier monster usually required several strong adult men working together, but here was a 6-year-old boy doing it all by himself. Son. Fortunately, he'd been prepared all along in line, claiming that the hearing had already been severely wounded and dulled by unlocks when Spotty said nothing. His explanation that he'd proved himself. In having that, he'd simply got him perfectly walking, and while concealing the turf, it because the proficient subverted differences in its worth. To wound the necessary proof, he could only muddle through for now. The Heron's feathers and magical stones were both quite valuable, but all his serf's harvest had to be turned over to the Lord at a rate of 60%. In the end, all he could keep was just 10 kilograms of meat. Ever since then, he'd gone out into the wild every day to hunt herons. The frog would provoke and draw attention, the water would weaken their abilities, Pucci would watch the frontal attack, while he himself would deliver the fatal blow. That day, he finally managed to slay a 10th heron. The experience he accumulated was just enough to utilize from level 1 to level 2. His abilities had nearly doubled below to the floor. The bit of plaything, by for the curing with Eslunuo. Already used to Karina, he'd been utterly powerless against her. Now, at least he had room to parry her attacks. Though he still couldn't match a 3-star opponent, taking on a 1-star rival was like crushing them utterly. The 1-star boy was someone he'd met by chance after his 5th birthday assessment. He always seemed to go looking for trouble, challenging him to duels, and each time he'd been fairly beaten, providing the perfect outlet for his frustrations. And he killed more and more Harns. His strength could no longer remain hidden. His parents would actually know something called Levra, if they always joked blind delight. So he was saying to concurrent himself. His parents said more. He'd been modest but not a food, great in actions, had his language, and endowed with intelligence and strength beyond the ordinary. It was just that completing the divine trials, a feat even 100 people might struggle to achieve, was why his abilities had appeared so low during the assessment. As for the profession of summoner, though he hadn't said a single word about it, merely brushing it off vaguely. After all, in this world, magical beasts were humanity's natural enemies, and summoners who could call forth such beasts were bound to attract suspicion and hostility. Thankfully, his parents hadn't crest war, and just what some were in, hadn't to endure such hardship with such an image. On the other hand, to himself had become pretty. His metal was free, maimed, and his felder, still recovering from Scylla's injury, couldn't work outside the home. Without him, the family simply wouldn't survive this winter. When they learned of his secret, his parents urged him not to reveal it to anyone except for one person, Gita, his father's best friend. In the boy's heart, Guido was already like a second father. Gerda taught him countless daily things. Serfs weren't allowed to leave the village freely, but Gerda occasionally went into town for shop, always taking them along to limit their prices and avoid fawning tropes. It was from word that this Lord was able to lead the serfs to really encounter quite 10 kilograms to the Lord. A king came before him used to be changed for 10 silver coins into 0.1 gold coin. To kill his 10 gold coins, he'd need to prepare the 3 coins. This gold became his driving force. Once he became a commoner, he'd be free to leave the village, with more opportunities to hunt monsters and level up quickly. He'd once thought about buying a weapon to boost his efficiency, but the price was far too high, so he'd given up. Besides, as a summoner, it wasn't really a necessity right now. He thought his days ahead would just be routine hunting humans and accumulating gold, but then, out of nowhere, came bad news. His father had just recovered from his injury, and Lord had delivered his word. The number of wild boar cases recovered from this should increase from 10 to 15 gold. Officially, the Lord said he'd seen commoners for none, but in reality, those people had zero experience and would only make things worse. After all, it was precisely because of wild boar hunting that his father had been injured in the first place. Now that the task had doubled, it meant the future would only get much more dangerous. Even if he managed to meet the quota, the Lord would likely keep raising the bar, demanding even more. But serfs' opinions carried absolutely no weight in front of the Lord. If they refused, they'd lose even the land independently for survival, leaving the whole family completely cornered. Back then, he minded just stood by and watched, but now that his family knew about his true strength, back could he possibly stay on? Back likely assembly to treat this wild boar hunt. Dad flew by, and the Patamlis had recently distributed, earning the chance to go hunting alongside the villagers. The target this time was a Class C monster, the wild boar. Considering his age and safety, he was only allowed to watch from afar and wasn't permitted to take part directly in the hunt. The villagers participating in the hunt had skill levels ranging roughly from Class C to this level. They already developed a well-established battle protocol for hunting wild boars. To outsiders, this observation trope was seen to offer Patamlis nothing more than an opportunity to broaden his horizons new real practical battle with them. But no one knew his weapon. Titzing, he would seem to be there when a Hoff can snag his narcissus. At Class C Mothra, the wild boar with an healthy Martin swinging towards the floating sleigh. 4 ordinary newcomers participating in the kill usually allowed them to jump several levels at once. But constrained by the rule that he could only watch from a distance, how could he possibly manage to get credit for the kill? While this might seem impossible for others, for him, as a summoner, it was entirely doable. It's not impossible to achieve. Unnoticed by anyone, the male protagonist has already secretly accumulated experience points and successfully leveled up to level 7. It turned out that right from the moment the wild Porpia, a quietly released its 7th beast. According to the rules of this world, gaining 6 points isn't necessarily required to even get it. Even if the summoned beast is called them Bevel, it's still considered to have participated in the fight, thereby granting its summoner experience points. To that end, the male protagonist had no choice but to let his grasshopper summoned beast sacrifice itself heroically. Thanks to the grasshopper's selfless act, after the wild boar was slain, the protagonist successfully obtained the corresponding experience points. If he continued in this manner, his level up would be only a matter of time. However, hunting wild boars was easy up. When taking down 1 or 2 boars was manageable, his levels increased, passing. How easy hunters became wild through Connie, especially since the Lord was wasn't the angel hunting board with wild boars for a year. As Ntamzi made the hunt even more taunting. In response to this situation, the protagonist came up with a solution: train more villagers to gain assist points. The Lord would supplement the hunting party with new members, though these newcomers had no levels and 0 combat experience. As long as they stepped in to deliver the final blow just before the wild boar died, they could, like the protagonist, gain assist points and earn experience. First, they'd use this method to raise their level. Once their strength reached the required standard, actually joint down will only be a matter of time. Meanwhile, the more people involved, the safer creature hunts would join eating the Lord ways the hunting food we get. Axel ate the hunt with fees. I casually said the ridiculous idea was a multi-level time. Before he knew it, 3 months had already passed. The good news was that, relying solely on gaining experience through assists, the protagonist had successfully climbed to level 6. With the blessing of his summoner's innate talent and the attribute boosts provided by his summon beasts, his current strength was already enough to surpass most adult neighbors group, who possessed D-level strength, yet he already lost in an all-wrestling match against the protagonist. But if he were to compete against Han, En's father, he'd suffer a crushing defeat. His father's strength was top-notch within the C-level range. Judging from this, the protagonist's current strength probably fell somewhere between C-level and B-level. His father had also promised that once the protagonist could beat him in an arm wrestling match, he'd allow him to truly join the hunt, and for the protagonist, it was merely a matter of time. But then came the night beast, good wild boars and hunters who match with beasts at a predictably young. But when for the match behind him months, the protagonist really paid to gain experience boosts behind him. Damn for the boy, and soon it was June, and sure enough, the protagonist's level remained stubbornly stuck at level 6. Yet surprisingly, his summoning skill had successfully risen to level 4. Each upgrade of the skill brought a leap forward in his strength. After this latest upgrade, 2 major changes occurred. First, the protagonist could finally summon first level summoned beasts. Leaving aside the beast's strength, the key point was that the attribute beasts that profoundly increased along with their level. In other words, at this point, the protagonist could already beat his father in arm wrested match. Second, a new storage skill could be ever. This in review at this skill point is the Icarus Form Space. Autogrid Speaker, an infinite storage space, was an incredibly valuable ability, but at first, the protagonist was puzzled by it. BF. Set on his past gaming experience, essential items tended to appear only when needed, and right now, he had no pressing need to store anything. Just as he was completely confused, the very act of preparing to summon a first level beast unveiled the mystery behind it. The system prompted him that summoning a first level beast required consuming a first level magic stone, a requirement that had never existed before. Previously, summoning a low level beast only required reading the magic pool flesh. Now, into reason the magic pool requirement, it was insistently demanded for magic stones. Fortunately, in this way, only imperial grade and higher magic stones were rare and valuable, while first level magic stones were low value and virtually ignored. The protagonist had managed to accumulate quite a few simply by picking them up off the ground. But just when he thought he'd be able to summon fully once he had the magic stones, the system reminded him again that the magic stones had to be placed into the storage space before they could be used. At that moment, everything became clear and entirely logical. After all, as summoning needs skill people, the knowing that magic stones are followed in keep increasing, it wouldn't be practical to carry millions of magic stones away. The storage still was something certainly problem. This time, the protagonist successfully summoned his first ever first level beast, which gave him boosts to endurance and agility. The second, Double. As a saber-tooth and tiger, purely offensive type beast that provided 10 points each to stamina and attack power. The third was an eagle, whose eagle-eye ability allowed it to scan the surrounding environment. The fourth was a grass-type beast, whose special skill was healing. The fifth was a stone-type beast, whose special skill was hunting. Though it seemed like the protagonist was alone, he now possessed comprehensive abilities using offense, defense, reconnaissance, and healing. It was precisely at this moment that he finally realized why the summoner class could be considered the strongest profession a single summoner could rival an entire army. Yet as a serf, he couldn't leave freely. If he wanted to level up by hunting magical beasts, he'd first have to become a commoner, and there were only two ways to do that. One was to pay the Lord 10 gold coins. Given his current circumstances, it would take him quite some time to save up that amount. No one knows when or even if this day will ever coin. Second, obtaining the Lord's Serum approval was as simple as a single point run, learn one to its name become commoner. After this, the male protagonist as a smith, the syncopile as a user. If, almost frequently, in the year he turned 8, the Lord himself decided to visit the village for an inspection. The reason was that the Lord had grown curious about the village's long-standing method of hunting wild boars. Of all the surrounding villages, only this consistently killed the highest number of wild boars each year. The village chief knew full well that the protagonist was deeply involved in all of this, so he specifically appointed the protagonist to be in charge of welcoming the Lord. This presented the protagonist was excellent opportunity to win the Lord of Thea in charge of the Queen Comedy. To this day, the Lord arrived this weekend. The Cogni Burn saw Keferi Inith when the stabber, female. Since this day the Lord had set a wild boar community to make his own spirited youth. He planned to have the cavalry assist the villagers in their hunt. But to his surprise, the protagonist stepped forward to stop them, insisting that there was no need for the cavalry's help. The village's existing manpower alone could handle the task. The protagonist's confidence piqued the Lord's curiosity, but Zima wore an expression of utter disdain, dismissing it all as mere boasting. The protagonist Dean took offense at Zima's oddity. Dismayed, the Lord and his entourage straight to the Hadith grounds, determined to prove his words through action. He arranged to the Lord and his to watch from the entourage and Telhaspa with the unshooted view, where they could prove his leading turn hunting crosses and fall. Then, the hunting team officially launched its operation. First, a group of young children took on the role of drawing the wild boar's attention. Next, the encirclement team moved in, using a massive shield to trap the boars. While the boars were immobilized, the spear-wielding team stepped in swiftly to deliver the final blow, ending the boars' lives in one smooth motion. The entire hunting procedure was clean and efficient, leaving the Lord utterly astonished. After all, in this world, wild boars were ordinary beasts who were secretly magical creatures, leaving the cavalry's efforts were utterly been able to achieve such feats and efficiency. There, a gore pursuers employing Maplecoda's worn eyes. Just then, an unexpected twist occurred. Two wild boars suddenly broke into the cavalry's formation. As the Lord and his party prepared to rush in and offer assistance, the protagonist stopped them. Explaining calmly, he said, "Don't worry, it's just two boars. Even if we had to deal with two at once, our village's hunting team can handle it effortlessly. Right now, we've got plenty of hands on deck. All we need to do is split up into two groups. Robson took down both boars simultaneously. It turned out that everything's a protagonist had invented a two-to-group free-riding method, as the number of wild boars simulcrease. The new Kernista droid with the Guinness Thurinis to witnessing the never's rise significantly. Not only had the available manpower greatly expanded, but the surplus loot had allowed the villagers to upgrade their equipment on themselves with shields and armor, making wild boar hunting now a piece of cake. On this hunt, the team killed 3 wild boars on the spot, and adding to the 7 already taken before the Lord's arrival, they already completed half of this year's 20 boar quota in just a few days. Seeing how calmly and steadily the protagonist had handled the entire the Lord grew even more impressed. He immediately asked who'd come up with the strategy for hunting wild boars. The protagonist didn't hear the truth he immediately professed Kanate. The Lord grew normally leave him, so he shattered all the credit onto this tribe. After witnessing the villagers' highly efficient hunting skills, the Lord decided to reward them generously. Every farmer who participated in this hunt would be granted commoner status. The protagonist never could have imagined that commoner status he'd long dreamed of would come so easily. What he didn't realize was that the Lord's generosity wasn't simply out of admiration for them, it was because increasing the wild boar hunting quota year after year had always been the king's mission. And given that their village was the one that hunting most, receiving this reward was entirely justified. Either way, this meant that the protagonist had finally gained this freedom though it could thwart freely depart Hunstons and level up. But before the protagonist had even gained the motion as free to pie to level up, the Lord abruptly changed the subject and announced that he'd give an extra reward to the protagonist's father, the man who'd been the greatest contributor to the hunt. Then he asked the father what he'd like as a reward. To the protagonist's utter dismay, his father actually requested that the Lord allow the protagonist to work at the Lord's residence even if it meant just being a lowly servant's assistant. He'd gladly accept. This request made the protagonist feel as if the sky had fallen. For most people, getting a job at the Lord's residence lets seem like a dream come true as to a protagonist who felt like falling into the Gethnali trap. Working at the Lord's residence might seem out to be even less free than being a job, getting vessel having no chance to kill out a lot of mothers to level up. Yet faced with his father's request, the Lord readily agreed. Throughout the whole encounter, the protagonist had left a deep impression on the Lord as someone clever and quick-witted, and the Lord was happy to keep such a child around him. The scene was filled with mixed emotions. Some villagers were overjoyed, while others were heartbroken. The protagonist was racking his brains, trying to figure out how to refuse, but just as soon as the Lord King consent, his father burst into tears of joy. Seeing his father's contentment, the protagonist trying to sell unable to bring himself to say no. He just finally listening to his joy, if please, following the father breed out of live. Is the father birds, the birds itself. He felt deadly reluctant to part with the male protagonist, especially his childhood sweetheart, Krina. Before their separation, Krina proposed that they have one last duel of battle she feared might be their only chance to see each other again. Naturally, the male protagonist couldn't refuse such a request. In all their previous confrontations, he'd always come out badly beaten. After all, Kree possessed the innate talent of a 3-star sword saint. Yet no one knew that those humiliating defeats were actually the result of the male protagonist deliberately holding back his true strength. In fact, thanks to the attribute boosts providing back his summon beasts, his actual ability had lent his brother Vashtria. Soon fell, the tanks and the creature provided. The male protagonist climbed aboard the Lord's carriage and set off alongside the Lord and his entourage, returning to the castle. Although he'd never once dreamed of becoming a male servant in the Lord's manor, after 8 years of life as a serf, he'd finally earned the status of a commoner, and now, at last, he had the chance to step into the bustling city. And so, his journey as a summoner was just beginning.